The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Pine Creek's dusty main street as Eleanor Blackwood stepped off the stagecoach. Her arrival silenced the usual bustle of the Montana frontier town like a sudden clap of thunder before rain. She stood there, a portrait of elegant mystery in her dark traveling dress, green eyes surveying the town as if measuring its worth. Nobody knew then that her arrival would forever change Jackson Miller's life and nearly end it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Some folks say love makes a man blind, others say it makes him foolish. In Jack Miller's case, it did both, and almost cost him everything. The first shot missed Jack Miller's head by less than an inch, splintering the wooden post behind him. The second tore through the sleeve of his coat as he dove behind the water trough. The third never came. "Damn it, Victor," Jack shouted, pressing his back against the rough wood of the trough. "This isn't the way." The main street of Pine Creek had emptied in seconds at the first gunshot. Doors slammed shut and curtains drew closed as the townsfolk retreated to safety. Only Sheriff Hayes remained on the boardwalk, his weathered hand hovering near his holster as he assessed the situation. Victor Hargrove stood in the middle of the street, revolver pointed at the water trough. His expensive suit was immaculate, despite the dust swirling around him, his polished boots reflecting the late afternoon sun. His face, however, was a storm of rage. "She's mine, Miller," Victor called, his voice eerily controlled. "She always has been." Jack's fingers inched toward his own revolver. He'd never wanted trouble, had spent his whole life avoiding it. But trouble had found him the moment Eleanor Blackwood had stumbled onto his property 3 months ago, soaked from the thunderstorm, a bruise blooming across her cheek and terror in her eyes. "She doesn't belong to anyone," Jack responded, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Least of all you." Victor's laugh was cold. "You don't know what she is, what she's done." The words echoed the warnings Jack had heard for weeks. From Tommy over whiskey at the Crossroads Saloon, "That woman's got secrets darker than a moonless night, Jack." From Sheriff Hayes on the church steps just yesterday, "There's something not right about her, son." Victor Hargrove's been asking about her in every town from here to Helena, from Mrs. Patterson at the general store. "That Blackwood woman brings trouble wherever she goes." But Jack hadn't listened, couldn't listen, not when Eleanor's smile lit something in him he'd thought had died with his wife 5 years ago. Not when her laughter made the loneliness of Silverwater Ranch bearable again. Sheriff Hayes stepped forward cautiously. "Put the gun down, Hargrove. Whatever this is about, it ain't worth hanging for." Victor's eyes never left the water trough. "You have no idea what she's worth." Jack counted his breaths, calculating his odds. He was a rancher, not a gunslinger. Victor was known for his temper and his aim, but Jack had something worth fighting for now. "She made her choice," Jack said louder this time. "Walk away." "She doesn't get a choice," Victor snarled. "Not after what she took from me." The gunshot cracked through the air like lightning, but it wasn't Victor who fired. Eleanor stood at the end of the street, a small derringer smoking. In her hand, Victor's gun arm jerked as the bullet grazed his shoulder. "The next one won't miss," she said, her voice carrying clearly down the empty street. Jack used the distraction to roll from behind the trough, his own revolver drawn. Victor stood frozen, caught between two guns, blood seeping through his expensive coat. "She's poison, Miller," Victor said, his eyes finding Jack's. "You'll see." The sheriff moved quickly then, disarming Victor and leading him away to the jailhouse. The danger passed for the moment, but Jack couldn't shake the chill that settled over him. Eleanor walked toward him, the small gun disappearing into the folds of her skirt. Her face revealed nothing. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her eyes scanning him. "No," Jack replied, holstering his weapon, "but we need to talk." That night at Silverwater Ranch, Eleanor sat at Jack's kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. Outside, the Montana wind howled through the pine trees, singing a warning Jack was still choosing to ignore. "He found me," she said simply. "I knew he would." Jack leaned against the counter, watching her. In the lamplight, she looked more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. The first time they'd met, she'd been a stranger in need. Now she was the woman he'd fallen for, and a mystery he couldn't unravel. "Who is he to you, Ellie?" Jack asked. The truth this time. She looked up, those green eyes searching his face. "My fiancé. Former fiancé." That's not the whole story. Eleanor's laugh held no humor. "No, it's not." She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkness as if seeking escape routes. Jack had seen that look in cornered animals. It unsettled him. "Victor Hargrove is one of the wealthiest men in Montana Territory," she began. "His family made their fortune in mining, then railroads. I was a governess for his younger sister." She paused. "He took an interest in me. Proposed. I accepted." Jack waited. There had to be more. Then I found out what kind of man he truly was. What he did to those who crossed him. Her voice hardened. "He has a room in his house. A room where he keeps trophies." "Trophies?" Eleanor turned, and the look in her eyes chilled Jack's blood. From the men who defied him, from the women who refused him. Jack thought of the rumors that followed Victor Hargrove, the business partners who disappeared, the previous fiancé who allegedly moved back east but was never heard from again. "I found letters," Eleanor continued, "proof of what he'd done. I was going to take them to the authorities, but he caught me." Her hand unconsciously touched her cheek where the bruise had been when Jack first found her. "I managed to take something else, something he values even more than those letters." "What was it?" Jack asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "A ledger," she replied. "Names, dates, amounts paid, evidence of every man he's bribed or blackmailed from here to Chicago." The wind rattled the windows as the implications settled over the room. Jack had invited danger into his home, offered it coffee, fallen in love with it. "I need to leave," Eleanor said suddenly. "He won't stop. He'll burn this place to the ground to get to me." Jack crossed to her, taking her cold hands in his. "I'm not afraid of Victor Hargrove." "You should be," she whispered. Jack Miller had built Silverwater Ranch with his own 2 hands after losing everything: his wife, their unborn child, his faith. He'd sworn never to let himself care that deeply again. Yet here he was, ready to face down one of the most dangerous men in the territory for a woman who'd arrived with nothing but secrets. "Where's the ledger now?" he asked. "Hidden. Somewhere he'll never find it." Jack nodded. "We leave at first light together." Eleanor's protest died on her lips as Jack pulled her close, his decision made. Everyone in Pine Creek had warned him about Eleanor Blackwood. But as the night deepened around Silverwater Ranch, Jack Miller chose to ignore them all. He wouldn't understand until much later that the warnings weren't just about her past, but about the storm that followed in her wake. Dawn broke cold and gray over Silverwater Ranch. Jack loaded the last of their supplies into the saddlebags, his breath fogging in the early morning air. Eleanor emerged from the house, wearing men's clothing, Jack's old pants and coat, her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "The sheriff will come looking once he realizes we've gone," Jack said, tightening the cinch on his stallion's saddle. "Victor won't stay in that cell long. His money will see to that." Eleanor mounted her horse with practiced ease that surprised him. "Where are we headed?" "West," Jack replied. "I have a friend with a cabin near the Idaho border. We can lie low there until we figure out what to do about that ledger." They rode in silence as the sun climbed higher, the familiar landscape of Silverwater Ranch disappearing behind them. Jack had told Tommy to look after the place, but hadn't explained why or where they were going. The less his friend knew, the safer he'd be if Victor came asking questions. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," Eleanor said as they forded a shallow stream, the cold water splashing against their boots. "This isn't your fight." Jack glanced at her. In the morning light, with determination set in her jaw, she looked nothing like the elegant woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 3 months ago. There was steel beneath her beauty, a resilience he'd glimpsed but was only now truly seeing. "I made it my fight when I let you stay that first night," he said. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You were just being kind. I was being foolish, according to everyone in Pine Creek." He guided his horse around a fallen tree. "Tommy said you'd bring nothing but trouble. Sheriff Hayes practically begged me to send you on your way." "They were right." Jack shook his head. "I've spent 5 years alone with nothing but cattle and ghosts for company. Even trouble's welcome when it breaks that kind of silence." By midday, they reached the edge of the forest that marked the beginning of the mountain pass. The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. Jack took the lead, eyes scanning the dense trees for any sign of pursuit. The back of his neck prickled with unease. "We're being followed," Eleanor said quietly, confirming his suspicion. Jack nodded. "Since the stream, 2 riders keeping their distance." "Victor's men." "Probably." Jack reached for his rifle. "There's an old mining camp about a mile ahead. We'll make our stand there." The abandoned camp appeared through the trees, a collection of dilapidated wooden structures reclaimed by nature. Jack led them toward the largest building, a former supply store with walls still mostly intact. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses inside. "These men," Jack said as he checked his revolver. "What will they do if they catch us?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "They won't kill me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Victor wants me alive." She met his eyes. "You're a different matter." Jack positioned himself near a window, watching the tree line. "Then I better not get caught." They didn't have to wait long. 2 riders emerged from the forest, approaching the camp with caution. Jack recognized one as Silas Bowers, Victor's foreman. The other was a stranger, but the rifle in his hands marked him clearly enough. "Come out, Miller," Silas called. "We just want the woman." Jack glanced at Eleanor, who had positioned herself at another window, her derringer ready. "What now?" she asked. "We talk," Jack replied. "See if we can reason with them." Eleanor's bitter laugh told him what she thought of that plan. "You can't reason with Victor's men." "Got any better ideas?" She hesitated. "Give me to them." Jack stared at her. "That's not happening." "Listen to me," she said urgently. "They'll take me back to Victor. It's a 2-day ride. That gives you time to get to the ledger and take it to the federal marshal in Helena. And what happens to you in those 2 days?" Her expression told him everything he needed to know. "Not an option," Jack said firmly. He turned back to the window. "Silas, I want to talk." "Nothing to talk about," the foreman shouted back. "Hand her over, and you can ride away." Jack watched the men carefully. They had separated, moving to flank the building. Amateur mistake, splitting their forces, or intentional strategy to flush them out. "I can't do that," Jack called. The answer came in the form of a rifle shot that splintered the wood beside the window. Jack ducked, then raised his own rifle and fired, forcing Silas to dive for cover. "Still think we can reason with them?" Eleanor asked dryly. Jack grimaced. "Maybe not." The gunfight that followed was brief but intense. Jack managed to wound the second man, sending him scrambling back toward the trees. Silas proved more persistent, pinning them down with steady fire from behind an overturned cart. "We need to move," Jack said, counting his remaining bullets. "They'll have horses in the trees. If we can get to them..." The sound of shattering Glass interrupted him as something came crashing through the rear window. A bottle wrapped in a burning rag landed on the wooden floor, flames spreading instantly. "Go!" Jack shouted, grabbing Eleanor's arm and pulling her toward the door opposite. The fire. Smoke filled the building rapidly as they burst outside, only to face Silas, his gun trained on them. "Drop it, Miller," the foreman ordered. Jack slowly lowered his rifle. "Smart man," Silas smirked. "The boss just wants what's his." "I was never his," Eleanor said, her voice ice. Silas's attention shifted to her for just a moment Jack used. He lunged forward, tackling the larger man to the ground. The gun discharged harmlessly into the air as they grappled in the dirt. Silas was stronger, but Jack fought with the desperation of a man who had found something worth fighting for. A sickening crack echoed as Jack's fist connected with Silas's jaw. The foreman went limp. Jack rolled away, breathing hard, only to find Eleanor standing over them, a heavy piece of firewood in her hands. "I helped," she said with a ghost of a smile. Jack got to his feet, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "We need to go. The fire will bring others." They retrieved their horses from the burning building just before the roof collapsed, then fled deeper into the mountains. By nightfall, they had put miles between themselves and the mining camp, but the danger felt no less present. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, building only a small fire that wouldn't be visible from a distance. Jack tended to the horses while Eleanor prepared a meager meal from their supplies. "Where is it?" Jack asked as they sat beside the fire, the stars appearing one by one overhead. "The ledger." Eleanor studied him for a long moment before answering. "Devil's Ravine. There's a cave behind the waterfall." Jack knew the place. It was treacherous territory, avoided by most local ranchers. "Smart hiding place." "I thought so." She passed him a cup of coffee. "Why are you doing this, Jack? Really? You barely know me." The question caught him off guard. Why indeed? He'd built a life of solitude after losing his wife, purposely keeping people at arm's length. Then Eleanor had arrived, and something had awakened in him, something he'd thought was buried alongside Sarah and their unborn child. "I know enough," he finally said. "You know what I've shown you," she countered. "Everyone in Pine Creek was right to warn you about me. I am dangerous to know." Jack met her gaze across the fire. "Is that why you came to my ranch that night? Because you knew I lived alone? Because I'd be easy to manipulate?" Pain flashed across her face. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Jack admitted. 3 months ago, you appeared on my doorstep. Now we're running from gunmen and talking about evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful men in the territory. Eleanor looked away. "I came to your ranch because the storm was bad and I was lost. I stayed because..." She hesitated. "Because for the first time in years, I felt safe." The crackling fire filled the silence between them. "When my wife died," Jack said quietly, "I stopped living too. I built that ranch, worked from dawn till dusk, fell into bed too exhausted to dream. Day after day, year after year." He stared into the flames. "Then you arrived. And brought nothing but trouble," she finished for him. Jack shook his head. "You brought life back even if it came with danger." Eleanor's eyes glistened in the firelight. "Jack..." A twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Both froze, listening intently. Jack slowly reached for his revolver. "Horses," Eleanor whispered. "More than 2. "Victor?" Jack asked. "Or worse?" They doused the fire quickly, gathered only what they could carry, and melted into the night, leaving the horses to create a distraction. As the sounds of pursuit grew behind them, Jack took Eleanor's hand, leading her deeper into the wilderness. The partnership that had begun with a thunderstorm and a desperate woman on his doorstep had become something neither had anticipated, something both were still learning to trust as they disappeared into the Montana night, the warnings of Pine Creek echoing in their wake. The Blackwater River roared below them, swollen from the spring melt, its waters dark and unforgiving in the pale morning light. Jack and Eleanor stood at the edge of the ravine, the narrow path before them their only route forward. Behind them, the distant sound of dogs barking signaled that their pursuers had found their trail. "We'll never make it across," Eleanor said, looking at the treacherous path that hugged the ravine wall. One misstep would mean certain death in the churning waters below. "We don't have a choice," Jack replied grimly. He'd recognized the dogs. Obeying, Victor had brought his prized hunting hounds, the same ones he used to track down runaway workers from his mining operations. Eleanor's face was pale but determined. "You should go back. Tell them I forced you to help me. Victor might believe it." Jack gave her a look that silenced further argument. "I go where you go." The path was barely wide enough for one person. Jack led the way, pressing his back against the rock face, inching forward carefully. Eleanor followed, her breathing steady, despite the deadly drop just inches from her feet. "Almost halfway," Jack encouraged, as they navigated a particularly narrow section. The first gunshot echoed across the ravine, the bullet striking the rock above their heads. Jack looked back to see riders at the path's entrance, too far for accuracy, but close enough to cause panic. "Keep moving," he urged Eleanor. "Don't look down." They quickened their pace as much as the treacherous path allowed. The shooting continued sporadically, most bullets harmlessly hitting the cliff face, but each impact sent shards of rock showering down on them. Then the path crumbled. It happened in an instant, a section of trail beneath Eleanor's feet giving way. She cried out, her hand grasping desperately as she began to fall. Jack lunged for her, catching her wrist, his other hand clinging to a jutting rock. The sudden weight nearly pulled him over the edge as well. "Hold on!" he shouted, muscles straining as he tried to pull her up. Eleanor dangled above the raging river, her feet scrambling for purchase against the sheer rock face. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Jack felt the burn as a bullet grazed his shoulder, but he didn't loosen his grip on Eleanor. "Let me go," she pleaded, looking up at him. "You can't save us both." "I'm not losing you," Jack growled through gritted teeth. With a tremendous effort, he pulled her up enough for her to grasp the edge. Together, they managed to get her back onto what remained of the path. They huddled against the cliff, breathing hard. The shooting had stopped. Their pursuers, likely, thought they'd fallen. "Why?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible over the river. "Why risk your life for me?" Jack looked at her, really looked at her. Her face was streaked with dirt, her borrowed clothes torn, her eyes wide with a vulnerability she rarely showed. In that moment, he knew. "Because I love you," he said simply. "God help me, Eleanor. I love you." Her expression shifted, surprise, giving way to something deeper, more complex. She reached up, her hand gentle against his cheek. "No one has ever chosen me before." "Not really." The moment was broken by the renewed barking of dogs. Their pursuers hadn't given up. "We need to keep moving," Jack said. "The cave can't be far now." They continued along the ravine path, more cautious after the collapse. By the time they reached the end, emerging into a forest thick with pine, the sounds of pursuit had faded. They had gained some time, but Jack knew it wouldn't last. "This way," Eleanor said, taking the lead. She moved through the forest with surprising confidence, following landmarks only she recognized. The waterfall appeared suddenly through the trees, a silver veil cascading over dark rocks into a deep pool, Devil's Ravine. They circled to the side of the falls, where a narrow ledge disappeared behind the curtain of water. "Wait here," Eleanor instructed, but Jack shook his head. "Together," he insisted. The space behind the waterfall was larger than it appeared from outside, a proper cave extending back into the mountain. The roar of the falls made conversation difficult as they moved deeper into the darkness. Eleanor felt her way along the wall until she reached a specific spot, then knelt and began moving rocks. From a hidden crevice, she withdrew an oilskin package, carefully wrapped and tied. The ledger. "This is what he's willing to kill for," she said, her voice echoing in the cave. Names, dates, amounts, every bribe, every threat, every person he's bullied or bought. Jack took the package, feeling its weight. "This is enough to destroy him." "If we can get it to the right people," Eleanor agreed. "The federal marshal in Helena has been trying to build a case against Victor for years." They made their way back to the cave entrance, pausing at the edge of the waterfall's spray. The forest beyond seemed peaceful, but Jack's instincts told him danger waited. "We'll rest here tonight," he decided. "Move at first light." As darkness fell, they settled in the cave, the sound of the waterfall a constant roar that would mask their presence. Jack tried to tend to his wounded shoulder, wincing as he removed his shirt to examine the damage. "Let me," Eleanor said, taking the cloth he'd been using. With gentle hands, she cleaned the graze. "It's not deep," she observed. "You were lucky." "Seems my luck's been changing since you came along," Jack replied with a wry smile. She didn't return the smile. "Everyone who gets close to me suffers, Jack. My parents died when I was young. My uncle who raised me lost his business trying to keep me in school. The family I worked for before Victor, their house burned down." "Coincidences," Jack said. Eleanor shook her head. "Victor told everyone in Pine Creek I was bad luck. That's why they warned you away from me." She met his eyes. "What if he's right?" "He's not." Jack took her hand, pressing it against his heart. "This is real. What I feel for you is real. Not luck, not coincidence." For the first time since he'd known her, Eleanor Blackwood wept, not the practiced tears of a society woman, but the raw, painful sobs of someone who had carried too much for too long. Jack held her, his arms a shelter against the storm of her grief. When she finally spoke again, her voice was changed, resolved. "I need to tell you everything about Victor, about me." Outside, the night deepened as Eleanor's story unfolded. She had been more than Victor's fiancée. She had been his accomplice, not willingly, not knowingly at first, but she had helped him nonetheless, delivering messages, keeping his secrets, entertaining his business associates while he made his corrupt deals. "I was blind," she admitted, "or I chose to be, until I found the room with his trophies." She shuddered at the memory. "I knew then what kind of monster he was, what kind of monster I'd agreed to marry." "You were a victim," Jack insisted. "I was a fool," she corrected, "and when I tried to leave, he showed me the ledger, told me I was in it too, that I'd delivered bribes, seduced men who stood in his way." She looked at Jack, fear in her eyes. "Some of it was true. I didn't know what was in the packages I delivered, but I delivered them. I didn't know why he wanted me to charm certain men, but I did it." Jack absorbed this, his expression unreadable in the dim light of their small fire. "So I stole the ledger," Eleanor continued, "ran as far as I could, and ended up on your doorstep." She took a deep breath. "Now you know everything. I'm not just bad luck, Jack. I'm guilty." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the thundering of the waterfall. "We've all done things we regret," Jack finally said. "What matters is what we do next." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "Didn't you hear me? I helped him. I was part of it." "And now you're trying to make it right," Jack said firmly. "That counts for something in my book." Before Eleanor could respond, a new sound cut through the constant roar of the falls. Voices. close. Jack was on his feet instantly, revolver in hand. "They've found us!" They peered carefully around the edge of the waterfall. Torches moved through the trees, illuminating at least a dozen men. Victor himself rode at their center, his pale face visible even in the dim light. "We're trapped," Eleanor whispered. Jack assessed their situation quickly. The cave must have another exit. Caves like this always do. And if it doesn't, he met her gaze steadily. "Then we fight." Eleanor looked at the approaching torches, then back at Jack. In his eyes, she saw not blind love or foolish hope, but clear-eyed determination. He had heard her confession and still stood beside her. He had been warned by everyone and still chosen her. In that moment, something shifted between them. A balance changing, a trust solidifying. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "There's something else you should know," Eleanor said, a new resolve in her voice. "Something about Victor that no one else knows. Something that might give us an advantage." Outside, Victor Hargrove's men began to surround the waterfall, unaware that the tide was about to turn against them. The deeper reaches of the cave narrowed into a labyrinth of passages, some barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Jack led the way, one hand on the rough stone wall, the other holding a makeshift torch. Eleanor followed close behind, the precious ledger secured inside. Her coat. "Are you sure about this?" Jack asked over his shoulder, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Victor has a weakness," Eleanor replied, "one that could destroy him faster than any ledger." They had been moving through the darkness for what felt like hours, guided only by the faint breeze that suggested another exit. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had grown, then faded as Victor's men struggled to navigate the complex cave system. "Tell me," Jack said as they paused at a fork in the tunnel. Eleanor's voice was low, almost reluctant. "He's not who he claims to be." Victor Hargrove died 6 years ago in Chicago. The man using his name is Charles Whitley, Victor's secretary. He assumed Victor's identity after his death, took control of his assets before the family could be notified. Jack stared at her. "How do you know this?" Letters in his private safe. Correspondence with a doctor who helped fake medical records. Eleanor met his gaze in the flickering torchlight. "I found them the same night I took the ledger." "That's why he's so desperate to find you," Jack realized. "It's not just about the ledger, it's about his entire identity." Eleanor nodded. The Hargrove family in Boston has never met Victor in person. He's always made excuses not to travel east if they knew. A sudden crash echoed through the tunnel behind them, followed by shouts. Their pursuers were getting closer. "This way," Jack decided, choosing the path where the breeze felt stronger. They moved faster now, the tunnel gradually widening until they emerged into a larger chamber. Moonlight filtered through a narrow fissure in the ceiling, illuminating. A pool of clear water, and beyond it, what appeared to be another passage. "We might be able to climb out there," Jack said, pointing to the fissure. A voice called from the tunnel they had just exited. "I can hear them. This way." There was no time. Jack helped Eleanor across the pool to the far passage, then took position behind a large rock formation, his revolver ready. The first man who entered the chamber fell immediately, Jack's bullet finding its mark. The second managed to fire back, the shot ricocheting off the cave walls. In the confined space, the gunfire was deafening. "Jack!" Eleanor called from the passage. "There's a way out!" He fired once more, then retreated to join her. The new tunnel sloped upward, rough natural steps leading toward what appeared to be open air. They climbed quickly, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. They emerged onto a narrow ledge halfway up the ravine wall, the waterfall visible. In the distance, below them, the Blackwater River churned angrily. Above, the cliff continued for another 40 feet. "We can follow the ledge," Jack said, catching his breath. "Try to circle back to—" "Miller!" Victor's voice boomed from the cave entrance. He stepped onto the ledge, revolver aimed at Jack's chest. Two of his men flanked him, their rifles ready. Enough of this chase. Jack moved slightly, positioning himself in front of Eleanor. It's over, Whitley. Victor's face contorted with rage at the use of his real name. Who told you that? His eyes fixed on Eleanor. You always were too clever for your own good. The federal marshal knows everything, Jack bluffed. The ledger, your real identity, all of it. Liar, Victor snarled. You haven't had time to reach Helena. His finger tightened on the trigger. Now Eleanor comes with me, or you both die on this ledge. She's not going anywhere with you, Jack said firmly. Victor's laugh was cold. Still playing the hero, even after you've learned what she is, what she's done. I know exactly who she is, Jack replied. Do your men know who you are, Charles? Uncertainty flickered in the eyes of the men behind Victor. One of them shifted uncomfortably. He's lying, Victor said quickly, trying to save himself. Ask him about Chicago, Jack pressed. About what happened to the real Victor Hargrove. Shut up! Victor's voice rose, a hint of panic breaking through his controlled facade. He turned to his men. Kill him! Bring her to me! The men hesitated just long enough. Eleanor stepped forward, producing a folded paper from inside her coat. This is a letter from the real Victor Hargrove to his sister, she announced. Written the day before his, secretary poisoned him. Victor's face drained of color. Where did you get that? The same place I found these, Eleanor said, producing another document. Medical records showing how you paid Dr. Leland to falsify Victor's death certificate. The men exchanged glances, their loyalty visibly wavering. She's lying, Victor insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Jack saw the moment the balance shifted. One of the men lowered his rifle slightly. Victor, sensing his control slipping, made his move. He lunged for Eleanor, grabbing her arm, his gun pressed to her temple. Back off, Miller, he growled. Or she dies right here. Jack froze, his weapon half raised. Eleanor's eyes met his, and in them he saw not fear but determination. It's over, Charles, she said calmly. You've lost everything. Not yet, Victor hissed. He began backing toward the cave entrance, dragging Eleanor with him. Drop your gun, Miller. Jack placed his revolver on the ground slowly. Now, kick it over the edge. Jack hesitated, then complied. The gun clattered against the rocks before disappearing into the rushing river below. You were a fool to get involved, Victor said, a sneer distorting his handsome features. Everyone warned you about her, didn't they? The cursed woman, the bad luck bride, he laughed. And now look at you, unarmed on a cliff, about to lose everything. You're wrong, Jack said calmly. I've already won. Victor frowned. What are you talking about? He's talking about me, came a new voice from the cave entrance. Sheriff Hayes stepped onto the ledge, his revolver trained on Victor. Behind him stood Tommy and 3 other men from Pine Creek. Let her go, Hargrove, or Whitley, whatever your name is. Victor's grip on Eleanor tightened. How did you... Jack sent a telegram before you caught up to us, Eleanor revealed. From the mining camp, told the sheriff everything. Victor's eyes darted between the new arrivals and the ledge. Desperation replaced calculation in his expression, the look of a cornered animal. It's over, Jack said again. Let her go. For a moment, the only sound was the rushing of the river below and the wind whistling through the ravine. Victor's eyes grew wild, darting between the sheriff's steady aim and the long drop to the churning waters. You're lying, he snarled, though doubt had crept into his voice. This is a trick. No trick, Sheriff Hayes said, taking a careful step forward. Your game is finished. The federal marshal is already on his way from Helena. With unexpected swiftness, Victor shoved Eleanor toward the cliff edge. Jack lunged forward, catching her before she could fall, but the movement left him vulnerable. Victor seized the opportunity, his revolver swinging toward Jack's exposed back. 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Victor staggered, red blooming, across his expensive coat. His face registered shock, then anger, then nothing at all, as he toppled backwards, his body disappearing over the ledge into the darkness below. Sheriff Hayes lowered his smoking gun. Beside him, Tommy and one of the other men had also fired. The ravine fell silent again, broken only by Eleanor's ragged breathing as she clung to Jack. "You all right, son?" the sheriff asked, holstering his weapon. Jack nodded, his arms still around Eleanor. "Better now." Tommy approached, clapping a hand on Jack's shoulder. "When we got your telegram, I thought you'd finally lost your mind." He glanced at Eleanor with newfound respect. "Guess I was wrong about a few things." "We all were," Sheriff Hayes admitted. "The journey back to Pine Creek was slow and subdued. Victor's remaining men were taken into custody, the story of their employer's true identity and crimes spreading through the territory like wildfire. By the time they reached town, a crowd had gathered in the main street, watching in silent curiosity as the procession arrived. Jack helped Eleanor down from her horse in front of the sheriff's office, conscious of the many eyes upon them. The whispers were already starting, new rumors to replace the old ones. "The federal marshal should be here by tomorrow," Sheriff Hayes said. "He'll want statements from both of you." Eleanor nodded, her face pale but composed. The ledger and documents were safely locked in the sheriff's desk drawer, evidence of crimes that would shatter the Hargrove Empire. "You're welcome to stay at my place tonight," Tommy offered unexpectedly. "Mrs. Cooper always keeps a spare room ready." Jack glanced at Eleanor, who looked as surprised as he felt by the sudden change in Tommy's attitude. "Thank you," she said, quietly. "But I think I need to face this town on my own terms." Jack understood. Together they walked down Pine Creek's main street, past the staring faces and hushed conversations. Some nodded in acknowledgement, others turned away. Outside the Crossroads Saloon, Mrs. Patterson, who had been among the most vocal in warning Jack about Eleanor, actually offered a small smile. "Folks will come around," Jack said as they reached the small hotel at the end of the street. "Truth has a way of changing minds." Eleanor paused at the hotel steps. "And what about you, Jack Miller? Has the truth changed your mind about me?" He studied her face in the fading light, the strength in her eyes, the determination in the set of her jaw, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. "No," he said simply. "It just confirmed what I already knew." That night, Jack sat alone on the hotel's front porch, watching as Pine Creek settled into evening routines. Lanterns were lit, saloon piano music drifted through the air, and the stars emerged overhead. The events of the past days felt almost dreamlike now, yet the ache in his shoulder and the dried mud on his boots were tangible reminders of their reality. The door opened behind him, and Eleanor stepped out. She had changed into a simple dress borrowed from the hotel owner's wife, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Jack gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Been saving it for you." She sat, her gaze following his out to the quiet street. "The sheriff says they found Victor's body downstream. It's really over." "For him, maybe," Jack said. "What about you? What happens now?" Eleanor's fingers twisted in her lap. "The marshal will want me to testify about everything." She looked at him, "Including my part in it all." "You were as much Victor's victim as anyone," Jack argued. "Not entirely." Her voice was steady. "I made choices, Jack. Bad ones. I looked the other way when I should have spoken up. I have to answer for that." He reached over, taking her restless hands in his. "Then we'll face it together." Eleanor studied their joined hands. "You keep saying that. Together. Even after everything you've learned about me? Why?" Jack considered the question. 5 years ago, he had buried his heart alongside his wife and unborn child. He had built walls around himself, constructed a life where nothing and no one could hurt him again. Then Eleanor had arrived, and those walls had crumbled, not all at once, but slowly, inevitably, like a dam finally giving way to the pressure behind it. Because for the first time since Sarah died, I'm not just existing, he said quietly. I'm living again. Eleanor's eyes glistened in the dim light. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just needed somewhere to hide. And I needed someone to wake me up. Jack smiled slightly. Seems we found each other at exactly the right time. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Jack woke early, habit driving him from bed despite his exhaustion. He found Eleanor already downstairs, drinking coffee with Sheriff Hayes. The lawman looked up as Jack entered. Marshal Williams just arrived on the morning stage, he announced. Wants to see both of you right away. Federal Marshal Daniel Williams proved to be a stern-faced man with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened carefully as Eleanor presented the ledger and documents, laying out the full story of Victor Hargrove's, Charles Whitley's, crimes and deceptions. This is quite a tale, Miss Blackwood, the Marshal said when she had finished. And your own involvement? Eleanor straightened her shoulders. I delivered packages that I later realized contained bribes. I entertained business associates while corrupt deals were made. I didn't know the full extent of it at first, but ignorance isn't an excuse. Jack started to interject, but Eleanor silenced him with a look. This was her moment of reckoning, and she would face it on her own terms. Marshal Williams studied her for a long moment. The Hargrove case has been a thorn in my side for years. This ledger gives me enough to bring down half the corrupt officials in the territory. He leaned forward. I could use a witness who knows the inner workings of the operation. I'll testify to everything I know, Eleanor promised. It might mean traveling to Helena, possibly even to Chicago. The Marshal's expression remained unreadable, and it would require your full cooperation. She has my full support, Jack said firmly, ignoring Eleanor's warning glance. The Marshal looked between them, something like amusement briefly crossing his weathered face. I can see that. He turned back to Eleanor. In exchange for your testimony, Miss Blackwood, I'm prepared to offer immunity for any role you played in Whitley's schemes. Relief washed over Eleanor's face, quickly replaced by determination. I want to help make this right. Then we have an agreement. The Marshal stood, gathering the documents. I'll be in town for the next few days taking statements. We'll speak again before I return to Helena. When the Marshal had gone, Eleanor turned to Jack, her expression a mixture of disbelief and hope. Immunity, she whispered. I never thought. Jack squeezed her hand. It's a second chance. For both of us. The days that followed brought a gradual shift in Pine Creek. As the true story of Victor Hargrove's deception spread, the town's attitude toward Eleanor began to change. The whispers continued, but they carried a different tone now. Not condemnation, but fascination, even admiration. Tommy was the first to openly apologize. He found Jack at the general store, buying supplies to take back to Silverwater Ranch. I was wrong about her, he admitted, helping Jack load sacks of flour into the wagon. Reckon most of us were. Jack secured the last of the supplies. She never asked for anyone's approval. Maybe not, Tommy acknowledged, but she deserves it all the same. Even Mrs. Patterson, standing in the doorway of her shop, called out as they passed, Miss Blackwood is welcome in my store any time, Mr. Miller. You tell her that. Jack smiled at the transformation. I will. By the end of the week, Marshal Williams had completed his investigation in Pine Creek and was preparing to return to Helena. He found Jack and Eleanor at the hotel, discussing plans for the future. "I'll need you in Helena next month for the preliminary hearings," he informed Eleanor. "There will be depositions, formal statements." "I'll be ready," she assured him. The marshal nodded, satisfied. "The Hargrove family in Boston has been notified of the situation. They're understandably shocked, but grateful for your role in exposing the fraud." He hesitated, then added, "They've expressed a desire to meet with you, to hear the full story firsthand." Eleanor paled slightly. "I'm not sure that's wise." "They don't blame you," the marshal clarified. "Quite the opposite. It seems the real Victor Hargrove was well loved by his family. Learning the truth about his death has brought them a measure of peace." After the marshal departed, Eleanor stood by the window, watching as the stage prepared for its journey to Helena. "Boston," she murmured. "I never thought I'd have reason to go there." Jack moved to stand beside her. "You don't have to decide anything right now." She turned to face him. "What about Silverwater Ranch? You've been away for over a week." "The cattle can survive a few more days without me." Jack's gaze was steady. "I'm more concerned about what you want, Ellie." The nickname, one he'd never used before, brought a soft smile to her lips. "What I want," she repeated, as if the concept was foreign to her. "I've spent so long running, hiding, surviving. I'm not sure I remember how to want things." "Try," Jack encouraged gently. Eleanor took a deep breath, looking around the simple hotel room, then back to Jack's patient face. "I want peace," she said finally. "I want to stop looking over my shoulder. I want to wake up in the same place every morning and not be afraid." Her voice grew stronger. "I want to testify against Victor's crimes and help make amends for my part in them." She met Jack's eyes directly. "And I want to know if there's really a place for me at Silverwater Ranch." Jack felt something expand in his chest. Hope, perhaps, or simply the release of a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "There has been, since the moment you arrived." The following day, they left Pine Creek together. The town gathered to see them off, a far cry from the suspicious glances that had greeted Eleanor months before. Sheriff Hayes shook their hands firmly, promising to send word when the formal trials began. Tommy clapped Jack on the back, whispering something that made him smile. The journey back to Silverwater Ranch was different from their flight through. The mountains, slower, more peaceful. They followed the main road, stopping when they wished, talking about everything and nothing. Jack spoke of his plans for the ranch, the improvements he'd been considering. Eleanor shared stories from her childhood, tales of the uncle who had raised her after her parents' death. "He would have liked you," she told Jack as they made camp. On the final night of their journey, he had no patience for people who judged others without knowing them. "Sounds like a wise man," Jack replied, stoking the campfire. "I'm sorry I never got to meet him." Eleanor smiled sadly. "He always said trust had to be earned, not given blindly." She looked at Jack across the flames. "You trusted me when everyone said not to." "Not blindly," Jack corrected. "I saw something in you from the beginning, something worth believing in." The firelight danced across her face as she considered this. And now, after everything? Jack set down the stick he'd been using to tend the fire and moved to sit beside her. "Now I know I was right." The next day, Silverwater Ranch appeared on the horizon, its buildings golden in the afternoon sun. As they approached, Jack felt a tightening in his chest. Not anxiety, but a sense of rightness, of homecoming. Eleanor must have sensed his thoughts. "It looks just the same," she observed. "It is," Jack agreed, "and it isn't." He glanced at her. "Nothing really is anymore." They rode into the yard together, dust kicking up beneath their horses' hooves. The ranch had weathered their absence well. Tommy had seen to that. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. Chickens scratched in the yard, and smoke rose. From the chimney. Jack dismounted first, then helped Eleanor down. For a moment they simply stood there, taking in the scene, adjusting to the strange normality of it after all they'd been through. "Welcome home," Jack said softly. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes questioning. "Is it? Really?" Instead of answering, Jack took her hand and led her to the porch. They sat on the steps, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The air smelled of pine and earth and possibilities. "When Sarah died," Jack began, his voice low, "I thought my life was over. I came here to escape, to hide from the world, built this place as a fortress against feeling anything again." He looked out over the land he had poured himself into. "Everyone in Pine Creek thought I was just grief-stricken. They expected me to eventually move on, find another wife, start again." He shook his head. "But I wasn't just grieving. I was afraid. Afraid of caring that much again. Afraid of losing everything a second time." Eleanor listened silently, her hands still in his. "Then you showed up during that storm," Jack continued. "Soaked to the bone, bruised, terrified, but still fighting, still surviving." He turned to her. "You reminded me what courage looks like." "I was just running," Eleanor objected softly. "No," Jack disagreed. "You were fighting back. Taking the ledger, exposing Victor's crimes. That wasn't running, that was standing up for what's right, even when it cost you everything." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "It didn't cost me everything, it brought me here." Jack's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "When everyone in town warned me about you, told me you'd bring nothing but trouble, you know what I thought?" He smiled slightly. "I thought, good. Trouble means I'm still alive." A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. "And now? Now that the trouble's over?" "Who says it's over?" Jack's smile widened. "The federal trials, the Hargrove family in Boston, rebuilding this ranch the way it should be, sounds like plenty of trouble ahead to me." Eleanor laughed softly, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch yard. "When you put it that way." This, Jack reached into his pocket, withdrawing something small that caught the fading sunlight. "I've been carrying this since Sarah died," he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold band. "Not because I couldn't let her go, but because I couldn't imagine finding someone who would make me want to use it again." His eyes met Eleanor's. "Until now." Eleanor's breath caught. "Jack, I'm not asking yet," he clarified quickly. "We've both been through too much, too fast. You need time to find your footing, to be sure of what you want." He closed his hand around the ring. "But when you're ready, if you ever are, this belongs to you, no one else." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, the lines around, his eyes from squinting in the sun, the stubble along his jaw, the quiet strength in his weathered hands. This man who had stood beside her when everyone else stepped away. "I don't need time," she said softly. Jack's eyebrows rose. "Ellie, I've spent my whole life being careful," she interrupted, "making safe choices that turned out to be the worst ones possible. The one reckless thing I did, stealing that ledger, running away, led me here." She squeezed his hand. "To you." The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson as Jack slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger. It fit, as if it had been made for her, not perfectly but well enough, like their unlikely story, like their second chance at happiness. "Everyone warned the cowboy about the bride," Eleanor murmured, a smile playing at her lips. "And the cowboy didn't listen," Jack finished, pulling her close as the first stars appeared overhead. In the months that followed, Pine Creek watched as Silverwater Ranch transformed. New fences went up, the house received a fresh coat of paint, and additional cattle expanded the herd. The trials in Helena made headlines across the territory. Hargrove, revealed as fraud. Corruption ring exposed by brave witness, with Eleanor's testimony proving crucial to convictions that reached as far as Chicago. The Hargrove family, grateful for the truth about their lost son, offered Eleanor a position managing their considerable holdings in Montana territory. She declined politely, explaining that she had found her home already, though she valued their forgiveness and understanding. When Marshall Williams visited Silverwater Ranch 6 months later, he found a different place than he had expected. Children from neighboring farms played in the yard while their parents helped raise a new barn. Eleanor, dressed in practical work, clothes, directed the efforts with natural authority, while Jack moved among the workers, his laughter carrying on the wind. "You've built something special here," the marshal observed, as Eleanor offered him coffee on the porch. She smiled, watching as Jack demonstrated proper hammering technique to a young boy. "We're still building," she corrected. "The rumors about you have changed," the marshal noted. "Now folks say you're the best thing that ever happened to Pine Creek and to Jack Miller." Eleanor's finger traced the simple gold band on her hand. Funny how warnings can turn into welcomes. The marshal followed her gaze to where Jack was now approaching, his smile widening as he caught sight of her. "Not so funny," the lawman said quietly. "Just takes the right person to see beyond the warnings to the truth." As Jack joined them on the porch, taking Eleanor's hand naturally in his own, the marshal raised his coffee cup in a small toast. "To seeing the truth," he offered. Jack's eyes never left Eleanor's face as he replied, "To ignoring the warnings when it matters most." On the hill overlooking Silverwater Ranch, a single headstone stood in a small fenced area, Sarah Miller's final resting place. Eleanor visited often, bringing wildflowers in spring, pine boughs in winter. She spoke sometimes, telling Sarah about the ranch, about Jack, about the life they were building together. "I'll take care of him," she promised. On one such visit, the Montana wind carrying her words across the open land. "You don't have to worry anymore." Some in Pine Creek still remembered the warnings, the whispers, the suspicions that had surrounded Eleanor Blackwood when she first arrived. But now they told a different story. One of a brave woman who had exposed corruption, who had brought life back to a grieving man, who had transformed from an object of suspicion to a pillar of their community. And if anyone new came to town asking about the couple at Silverwater Ranch, they might hear the tale of how everyone had warned the cowboy about his bride, and how his refusal to listen had led not to disaster, but to the greatest happiness of his life. For Jack and Eleanor Miller, the warnings had become part of their story, a reminder that sometimes the greatest risks bring the greatest rewards, that sometimes a person everyone warns you about turns out to be exactly who you need. As their ranch flourished and their lives intertwined, they kept a saying between them, a private reminder of their unlikely beginning. "The best things in life," Jack would murmur against Eleanor's hair as they watched the sunset from their porch. "Come with warnings," she would finish, leaning into his embrace as night fell over Silverwater Ranch. And they were right. The seasons turned like pages of a well-worn book at Silverwater Ranch. Summer heat gave way to autumn gold. Then winter's quiet blanket before spring burst forth with renewed promise. 2 years had passed since Jack and Eleanor had faced down Victor Hargrove, or rather Charles Whitley, at Devil's Ravine. 2 years of building something neither had dared to imagine before, a life of purpose, of connection, of belonging. On a crisp April morning, Eleanor stood on the porch of their expanded homestead, watching as the sun crested Eagle Mountain. The ranch had grown considerably. Additional pasture land, a larger barn, even a small bunkhouse for the 3 hands. They'd hired to manage the increasing herd. The modest operation Jack had maintained in his solitude had blossomed into one of the most prosperous cattle ranches in the county. "Mail came early," Jack said, stepping onto the porch with several envelopes in hand. His face had softened over. The past years, the harsh lines of grief and isolation replaced by new ones, laugh lines around his eyes, concentration furrows on his brow from poring over breeding records and ledgers in the evening. Eleanor accepted the letters, rifling through them quickly before stopping at one with elegant handwriting and a Boston postmark. "It's from Elizabeth Hargrove," she said, surprise coloring her voice. Jack leaned against the porch railing. "Victor's sister? What does she want?" Eleanor broke the seal and unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the careful penmanship. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern, then to something more complex. "What is it?" Jack asked. "The Hargrove Mining Company is failing," Eleanor said, looking up from the letter. "After the trials exposed Charles's corruption, many of their business partners withdrew. The family's struggling to keep the operation afloat." She continued reading. "Elizabeth is asking for my help. She wants me to come to Boston and review their holdings, help them salvage what remains of the legitimate business." Jack studied his wife's face. "And what do you want to do?" Eleanor folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into its envelope. "I'm not sure. 2 years ago, I would have said they deserved whatever came their way. But Elizabeth lost her brother twice, once to death and once to the revelation that someone had been impersonating him." She sighed. "She didn't deserve any of this." "Neither did you," Jack reminded her gently. Eleanor smiled at him, grateful for his steady presence. "I should at least consider it. The company employs hundreds of people across the territory. If it fails completely..." Jack nodded, understanding. Eleanor had built a reputation beyond Pine Creek as someone who fought for justice, who made difficult choices for the right reasons. The trials in Helena had revealed not just her courage in exposing Victor's crimes, but her determination to make amends for her unwitting role in them. "If you decide to go," Jack said, "I'm coming with you." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Jack Miller in Boston society. I'd pay good money to see that." He laughed, pulling her close. "I clean up well enough when I need to." The decision wasn't made lightly. For 3 days, they discussed the possibilities, the risks, the obligations. Eleanor had never been to Boston, had never imagined herself advising a family as prominent as the Hargroves. Jack had responsibilities at the ranch, spring carving to oversee, fences to repair after the winter snow. In the end, it was Tommy who tipped the scales. "Ranch will still be here when you get back," he assured them over dinner at the house he shared with his wife in Pine Creek. "Me and the boys can handle things for a few weeks." He grinned at Jack. "Besides, about time you saw something beyond Montana. Get some culture in you." So it was decided. Eleanor wrote to Elizabeth accepting the invitation, and preparations began for a journey neither of them had anticipated. The train journey east was a revelation for both of them. Jack, who had never traveled farther than Helena, watched with quiet amazement as the landscape transformed from the rugged Montana wilderness to the rolling plains of the Dakotas, then the fertile farmlands of the Midwest, and finally the increasingly crowded settlements of the eastern states. Eleanor, too, saw America with new eyes, not as a fugitive fleeing westward, but as a woman of consequence traveling with purpose. In Chicago, where they stopped for 2 days, she visited the offices of the federal prosecutor who had helped build the case against Victor's accomplices. She was received not as a witness or informant, but as a respected collaborator in bringing justice to the region. "You've made quite a name for yourself, Mrs. Miller," the prosecutor told her as they toured the courthouse where the final trials had taken place. Your testimony was instrumental in dismantling one of the most corrupt networks in the Midwest. Eleanor accepted the praise with grace, but later confessed to Jack in the privacy of their hotel room, "I still feel like I'm making up for lost time. For all the years I didn't see what was happening or chose not to see it." Jack took her, hands in his. "You can't change the past, but what you're doing now matters." Boston, when they finally arrived, was unlike anything either of them had experienced. The city pulsed with history and commerce, its streets lined with brick buildings and gas lamps, its harbor busy with ships from around the world. Their hotel, arranged by the Hargrove family, overlooked the common, a park that seemed impossibly green and manicured compared to the wild beauty of Montana. "I feel like I've stepped into another world," Jack admitted as they dressed for their first meeting with Elizabeth Hargrove. He tugged at the collar of his new suit, purchased in Chicago at Eleanor's insistence. "How do people breathe in these things?" Eleanor adjusted his tie with practiced hands. "You look handsome," she assured him, "and completely out of your element." He caught her wrist gently. "As long as you're with me, I'm exactly where I belong." The Hargrove estate in Beacon Hill was a testament to old money and older traditions, tall windows, intricate moldings, and furnishings that spoke of generations of wealth and influence. Elizabeth Hargrove received them in a drawing room overlooking a carefully tended garden, her posture perfect, her dark hair showing the first strands of silver. "Mrs. Miller," she said, extending her hand, "I cannot thank you enough for coming all this way." Eleanor took the offered hand. "Please call me Eleanor." Elizabeth's smile was tinged with sadness. "And you must call me Elizabeth. After all we've been through, formality seems rather pointless, doesn't it?" She turned to Jack, assessing him with intelligent eyes that reminded Eleanor uncomfortably of Victor. "Mr. Miller, I've heard much about you as well. Your testimony at the trials was most illuminating." Jack accepted her handshake with simple dignity. "Ma'am, please sit." Elizabeth gestured to a seating arrangement by the window. "Tea will be served shortly." As they settled into the elegant surroundings, Eleanor noted the subtle signs of strain beneath Elizabeth's composed exterior. The tightness around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she arranged her skirts. This was a woman carrying a heavy burden. "I imagine you're wondering why I've asked you here," Elizabeth began, once the servants had brought tea and withdrawn discreetly. "Your letter mentioned difficulties with the mining operations," Eleanor prompted. Elizabeth nodded. "That's part of it. After the trials revealed the extent of the imposter's corruption, our business partners began withdrawing. Contracts were cancelled. Investors demanded their money back." She set down her teacup with a barely perceptible clink. "But that's not the whole story." Eleanor and Jack exchanged glances. "What else?" Jack asked. "Someone is trying to destroy what remains of our family business," Elizabeth said directly. "And I believe it may be connected to what happened to my brother." The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, document reviews, and revelations. The Hargrove Mining Company's offices in downtown Boston became their headquarters as Eleanor delved into financial records, correspondence, and contracts. Jack, to everyone's surprise, including his own, proved adept at identifying practical issues with the mining operations, his experience with managing land and resources translating unexpectedly well. "These equipment costs are inflated," he pointed out during a review of the Montana operations expenses. "No foreman worth his salt would have approved these purchases without questioning them." Eleanor examined the documents he indicated. "You're right, and look at the supplier, Westford Equipment Company." She pulled out another folder. "They appear in several other questionable transactions. We should look into who owns it." Elizabeth, who had been observing their work with growing respect, made a note. "I'll have our lawyers investigate immediately." As they pieced together the puzzle, a disturbing pattern emerged. Someone with intimate knowledge of the Hargrove business was systematically undermining it from within, approving exorbitant expenses, alienating reliable partners, redirecting assets through shell companies. "This isn't opportunistic," Eleanor concluded one evening, as she and Jack reviewed their findings in their hotel suite. "This is methodical, personal." Jack nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. "The question is, who stands to gain from the Hargroves?" "Don't fall." The answer came from an unexpected quarter. Margaret Whitley, Charles's mother, still lived in a modest home on the outskirts of Boston. When Eleanor suggested they speak with her, Elizabeth was hesitant. "The poor woman was devastated when she learned what her son had done," she explained. "She's been a recluse ever since the trials." "She might know something," Eleanor persisted, "about Charles's associates, people who might be continuing his work." Elizabeth finally relented, arranging for a carriage to take them to the Whitley residence the following day. Margaret Whitley was nothing like Eleanor had imagined. Instead of a fragile elderly woman broken by scandal, they found a sharp-eyed, dignified lady tending a small but immaculate garden. She invited them in without surprise or hostility, as if she had been expecting them all along. "I wondered when you would come," she said, serving them tea in simple cups that stood in stark contrast to the Hargrove china. "You're the woman who exposed my son." Eleanor met her gaze directly. "I am." Margaret nodded slowly. "Good, it needed to be done." The blunt statement caught them all off guard. "Mrs. Whitley," Elizabeth began hesitantly, "we've come because someone is finishing what Charles started," Margaret interrupted, "destroying the Hargrove legacy piece by piece." She set down her teacup. "It's Silas Bowers." Jack straightened. "Victor's Charles's foreman, the man from the mining camp?" "The very same," Margaret confirmed. "He and Charles were closer than you knew. Like brothers, really. They grew up together, schemed together." Her mouth twisted. Bitterly, when Charles decided to become Victor Hargrove, Silas helped him every step of the way. He was there when the real Victor died. Eleanor's mind raced, connecting pieces of the puzzle, but Silas was arrested after the confrontation at Devil's Ravine. He was sent to prison. "Prison terms end," Margaret said simply, "especially when certain officials can be persuaded to grant early release." "How do you know all this?" Elizabeth asked, her voice strained. Margaret Whitley's expression softened slightly. "Silas came to see me 3 months ago. Told me he was going to finish the job for Charles, avenge him, as he put it." She looked at Eleanor. "He mentioned you specifically, Mrs. Miller. Said you would understand sooner or later." A chill ran through Eleanor at the implication. "He's targeting us as well as the Hargroves." "It would seem so," Margaret agreed. "My son inspired unfortunate loyalty in certain quarters." Jack's hand found Eleanor's, squeezing reassuringly. "Do you know where Silas is now?" he asked Margaret. "He didn't share his lodgings," she replied dryly, "but he did mention returning to Montana eventually. Said there was unfinished business there." On the carriage ride back to Boston proper, a heavy silence hung between the 3 passengers. Finally, Elizabeth spoke, her voice tight with anger. "All this time, I've been looking for financial conspiracies, business rivals, and it's been revenge all along." Eleanor stared out the window at the passing countryside, so different from the Montana landscape she had come to love. "Not just revenge," she said quietly. "Silas was as much a part of the scheme as Charles was. If he can destabilize the Hargrove holdings enough, he could buy them for pennies on the dollar," Jack finished. "Pick up where Charles left off." Elizabeth's hands clenched in her lap. I won't let that happen. The Hargrove name may have been tarnished by that imposter, but it still means something. My brother's legacy deserves better. For the first time since meeting her, Eleanor saw the steel beneath Elizabeth's refined exterior, the same determination that had helped the family build an empire from nothing. In that moment, she made her decision. "We'll help you stop him," she said firmly. "But we need to move quickly. If Silas is planning to return to Montana..." Jack nodded, understanding her unspoken fear. Silverwater Ranch could be in danger, and they sent a telegram to Sheriff Hayes immediately, warning him about Silas Bowers' possible return to Pine Creek. Tommy was alerted to watch for any strangers or suspicious activity around the ranch. Then they turned their attention to identifying Silas's footprints in the Hargrove business. With Margaret Whitley's revelation providing context, the pattern became clearer. Using knowledge gained during his years as Charles's right hand, Silas had systematically targeted the most vulnerable parts of the Hargrove operations. False invoices, diverted shipments, strategically spread rumors that damaged the company's reputation, all executed through a network of shell companies and paid intermediaries. Here, Eleanor pointed to a name that appeared repeatedly in their investigations. Westford Equipment Company. The director is listed as Samuel Bowman. Elizabeth frowned. "That means nothing to me." "Rearrange the letters in Bowman," Jack suggested. "You get Bowers." "An anagram," Eleanor breathed. "Hardly subtle, but effective enough." The breakthrough led to others. With the help of Elizabeth's lawyers and contacts in Boston's financial district, they traced a web of transactions designed to drive the Hargrove Mining Company to bankruptcy. At the center of it all was a holding company prepared to purchase the assets once they reached their lowest value. "He's been planning this since before the trials," Eleanor realized as they compiled their evidence. "This isn't impulsive revenge, it's calculating theft." Elizabeth, who had shown remarkable resilience throughout the investigation, looked up from the documents spread across her study. "Can we stop him?" Eleanor exchanged a glance with Jack before answering. "Yes, but it won't be enough to just save the company. As long as Silas is free, he'll keep coming after the Hargroves after us." "Then what do you suggest?" Elizabeth asked. "We set a trap," Jack said, the plan forming as he spoke. "Let him think he's won. Draw him out into the open." Eleanor nodded slowly. "We need to make him believe the Hargrove Mining Company is on its last legs, that his final push has succeeded." "A public announcement of imminent bankruptcy," Elizabeth mused, catching on quickly. "A fire sale of assets, which his holding company will swoop in to purchase," Eleanor continued, "only instead of finding a broken company ripe for takeover. He'll find us," Jack finished, "and the federal authorities." The plan was audacious, risky, and their best hope of ending Silas's revenge plot once and for all. Over the next week, they worked tirelessly to put the pieces in place. Elizabeth made a somber announcement to the Boston business community about the Hargrove Mining Company's financial troubles. Rumors were strategically placed in key publications. The price of Hargrove stock plummeted. All the while, they were setting their trap. Federal marshals were briefed on the scheme. Evidence was compiled and verified. A small, exclusive auction was arranged for the company's most valuable assets, with invitations sent to a carefully curated list of potential buyers, including Samuel Bowman of Westford Equipment Company. The auction was to be held in the grand ballroom of Boston's most prestigious hotel. Security was discreetly enhanced, with marshals positioned as staff and guests. Jack, uncomfortable but resolute in formal evening attire, stood near one of the exits. Eleanor, elegantly dressed in a gown borrowed from Elizabeth, circulated among the attendees, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign of Silas. "Are you sure he'll come himself?" Elizabeth whispered as they passed each other near the refreshment table. "He could send a representative. He'll want to see his victory firsthand," Eleanor replied with certainty. "Charles would have, and Silas is cut from the same cloth." She was right. An hour into the event, as the auctioneer prepared to begin the proceedings, a newcomer entered. The ballroom, distinguished in appearance, with silver-streaked dark hair and an expensive suit, he bore little resemblance to the rough foreman who had pursued them through the Montana wilderness. But Eleanor recognized the cold calculation in his eyes immediately. "That's him," she murmured to Jack as she rejoined him, third from the left by the column. Jack nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'll alert the marshals." The auction began, the atmosphere tense beneath its veneer of social politeness. Elizabeth stood on the platform beside the auctioneer, her face a mask of dignified resignation as her family's holdings were offered up to the highest bidder. Silas, using the name Samuel Bowman, bid aggressively on each lot, outmaneuvering the few legitimate buyers in attendance. His confidence grew visibly with each successful acquisition, his posture relaxing, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When the final and most valuable mining operation came up for bid, he approached the platform directly. "I believe we could expedite matters," he announced. "I'm prepared to make an offer for all remaining Hargrove assets. A clean break, as it were." Elizabeth regarded him coolly. "That's very generous, Mr. Bowman. Or should I call you Mr. Bowers?" The smile froze on his face. His eyes darted around the room, noting for the first time the strategic positioning of several stern-faced men who had been inconspicuous until now. "I'm afraid I don't understand," he began, but Elizabeth cut him off. "I think you understand perfectly," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent ballroom. "Just as you understood when you and Charles Whitley conspired to murder my brother and steal his identity. Just as you understood when you began dismantling my family's company piece by piece after your release from prison." Silas's hand moved toward his jacket, but he found his path suddenly blocked by Jack Miller's imposing presence. "I wouldn't," Jack advised quietly. From behind Silas, Eleanor's voice added, "It's over, Silas. Again." He turned slowly to face her, hatred burning in his eyes. "You," he hissed, "you should have died in that ravine." "Many things should have been different," Eleanor acknowledged evenly. "But here we are." Duck. The federal marshals closed in, efficiently restraining Silas despite his struggles. As they led him away, he called back over his shoulder, "This isn't over, not while I still breathe." Eleanor watched him go, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her, relief, vindication, and a persistent unease. Jack's arm slipped around her waist, steadying her as always. "He's wrong," Jack said softly. "It is over." But as the excitement died down and the guests dispersed, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that Silas's words held a kernel of truth. Some stories didn't end neatly. Some threats lingered even after justice was supposedly served. That night, as they prepared to return to their hotel, a messenger delivered a note to Eleanor. It contained only 5 words, "See you in Montana, soon." She showed it to Jack without comment. His jaw tightened as he read it, then he crumpled the paper in his fist. "Let him try," he said firmly. "Silverwater Ranch has weathered worse than Silas Bowers." Eleanor nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. But as they left Boston behind the next day, beginning the long journey back to Montana, she couldn't help but feel they were heading toward another confrontation. One that would test everything they had built together. The warning that had once haunted Jack, everyone warned the cowboy about the bride, now seemed trivial compared to the new threat looming on their horizon. Yet as the train carried them westward, Eleanor found herself oddly at peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The cowboy who hadn't heeded the warnings, and the bride who had proven everyone wrong. Montana welcomed them home with a spring storm that washed the world clean, leaving the air crisp and sweet with the scent of new growth. As the stagecoach crested the final hill before Pine Creek, Eleanor felt the tension she'd carried since Boston began to ease. The familiar landscape spread before them, rolling grasslands dotted with cattle, the dark line of forest at the base of Eagle Mountain, and in the distance, the weathered buildings of Silverwater Ranch. Jack took her hand, his own relief evident. In the softening of his expression, almost home, Tommy Cooper was waiting for them at the stagecoach stop, his weather-beaten face breaking into a wide grin as they descended. "About time you two showed up," he called, striding forward to clap Jack on the shoulder. "Was starting to think you'd decided to become proper city folk." "Not a chance," Jack replied with a laugh. "How's the ranch?" "Thriving," Tommy assured him as he helped load their luggage into the waiting wagon. "Spring calving went smooth as silk. Got a fine crop of new stock, strongest I've seen in years." As they rode towards Silverwater, Tommy filled them in on local happenings. Mrs. Patterson's new granddaughter, Sheriff Hayes's upcoming retirement, the railroad spur, finally. Approved to connect Pine Creek directly to Helena. Normal, peaceful developments that should have reassured them. But Eleanor noticed how Tommy's eyes constantly scanned the horizon, how his hand never strayed far from the rifle propped beside him on the wagon seat. "Any strangers passed through town recently?" she asked casually. Tommy's hesitation was brief, but telling. "A few drummers, usual spring traffic." He glanced at Jack. "And a fellow asking questions about you two said he was an old business associate." Jack's jaw tightened. "What did he look like?" "Didn't see him myself," Tommy admitted. "Sheriff Hayes mentioned it when I picked up the mail yesterday. Said..." The man moved on after a day or so. Eleanor and Jack exchanged glances, the same thought passing between them. Silas Bowers had been released from custody in Boston on a technicality, a crucial document mysteriously missing from the evidence presented to the judge. Despite Elizabeth Hargrove's influence and resources, he had slipped away before they could build a new case against him. "Sheriff know about our telegram?" Jack asked. Tommy nodded. "Been keeping an extra eye on things. Got the boys taking shifts watching the ranch when they're not working." He offered a reassuring smile. "Nothing's happened yet, and maybe nothing will. Could be the man was just passing through." Neither Jack nor Eleanor believed that, but they let the subject drop as Silverwater Ranch came into view. Despite their concerns, the sight of home lifted their spirits. The place had flourished under Tommy's care, fences mended, garden planted, cattle fat on the spring grass. They settled back into ranch life with the ease of those returning to their true element. Jack immediately immersed himself in the day-to-day operations, consulting with their hired hands about the new calves, riding the boundaries to check for needed repairs. Eleanor found comfort in domestic rhythms, organizing the supplies they'd brought from Boston, preparing meals in the kitchen she'd expanded the previous year, tending to the chickens that provided a steady supply of eggs. But beneath these, normal activities ran an undercurrent of vigilance. Jack never went to the far pastures without his rifle. Eleanor kept her derringer close at hand, even when working in the garden. The ranch hands were briefed on potential danger, instructed to report any unfamiliar faces or unusual occurrences immediately. A week passed, then another. Spring deepened toward summer, the days growing longer, the prairie erupting in wildflowers. No sign of Silas Bowers appeared. Maybe Boston was enough for him, Jack suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Exposing his scheme, tying him to Charles Whitley's crimes, could be he's decided to cut his losses and disappear. Eleanor wanted to believe it. The life they'd built at Silverwater was precious to her. the ranch thriving, their place in the community secure, their partnership stronger than ever. The thought of losing it all to Charles Whitley's vengeful partner twisted like a knife in her chest. "Silas doesn't seem like a man who gives up easily," she said quietly. "The note he sent, he meant it as a promise." Jack's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Then we'll be ready." Sheriff Hayes arrived the next morning, his aging mare picking her way carefully up the drive. Jack met him in the yard, offering coffee, which the lawman gratefully accepted. They settled at the kitchen table, Eleanor joining them with a plate of fresh biscuits. "Got a telegraph from the federal marshal in Helena," Hayes announced without preamble. "Thought you should know right away." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "About Silas Bowers?" Hayes nodded, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "He was spotted in Butte 3 days ago. Bought supplies, enough for a long stay somewhere remote. Asked questions about routes to Pine Creek." Jack's expression hardened. "So he's on his way." "Looks that way," Hayes confirmed. "Marshal's sending a deputy, but it'll take him at least 4 days to get here from Helena." He hesitated, fingers tapping against his coffee cup. "There's something else you should know. Bowers wasn't alone in Butte. Had 2 men with him. Rough-looking. Characters, according to the reports. The news wasn't unexpected, but it complicated matters. One man they could handle. Jack was more than capable, and Eleanor had proven herself during their previous confrontation with Victor. But 3 men, potentially professional gunmen, presented a more significant threat. "Any idea when they might arrive?" Eleanor asked. Hayes shook his head. "Hard to say. Could be any time from tomorrow to next week, depending on their pace and route." After the sheriff departed, promising to check in daily and send word the moment the federal deputy arrived, Jack gathered the ranch hands for a council of war. The atmosphere was solemn as he explained the situation, but to Eleanor's surprise, not one of the men suggested leaving. "Silverwater's been good to us, boss," said Michaels, the oldest of their hired hands. "We ain't about to abandon it when trouble comes calling." The others nodded in agreement, their loyalty warming Eleanor's heart, even as she worried for their safety. These men had families, futures. They shouldn't have to risk them because of a vendetta that had begun before they'd even joined the ranch. "We appreciate that," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion, "but I want you all clear on what we're facing. These men won't hesitate to kill anyone who stands in their way." "Neither will we," Michaels replied simply. They prepared as best they could. The main house was reinforced, sightlines cleared, weapons cleaned, and ammunition distributed. The women and children from the neighboring homesteads were encouraged to stay in town until the danger passed. Tommy's wife, Martha, refused to leave, insisting on remaining to help Eleanor manage the logistics of feeding and supporting their impromptu militia. 3 days passed in tense anticipation. Then, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting long shadows across the yard, one of the hands spotted dust on the western trail. "Riders coming," he called from his lookout position on the barn roof. 3 of them, taking their time. Jack positioned their defenders strategically, 2 men in the barn loft with rifles, Michaels and another hand at the bunkhouse windows, himself and Tommy on the porch of the main house. Eleanor, despite Jack's initial protests, took up position at an upstairs window, her father's old hunting rifle ready. She had proven her marksmanship many times over during their years at Silverwater, bringing down deer and the occasional wolf that threatened their livestock. The riders approached with brazen confidence, making no attempt to conceal their arrival. In the lead rode a man Eleanor recognized immediately despite the distance. Silas Bowers, sitting tall in the saddle, his posture radiating arrogance. Flanking him were 2 strangers, hard-faced men with the loose-limbed ease of experienced gunfighters. They halted just beyond the main gate, assessing the ranch layout with calculating eyes. Silas raised his hand in mocking greeting. "Miller," he called. "I told you I'd be seeing you in Montana." Jack stepped forward, remaining within the protective shadow of the porch. "You're trespassing, Bowers. Turn around and leave while you still can." Silas laughed, the sound carrying clearly across the yard. "Is that any way to greet an old friend, after all we've been through together?" "We were never friends," Jack replied evenly, "and you've got nothing to gain here." "Nothing to gain?" Silas's voice hardened. "You and that woman took everything from me. Everything. Charles and I spent years building our operation, positioning ourselves to take control of the Hargrove fortune." His hand tightened on his saddle horn. "Then she comes along, steals our evidence, exposes our work, gets Charles killed, and you helped her do it." Eleanor kept her rifle trained on Silas, watching the other men through her peripheral vision. They were scanning the buildings, likely identifying the defensive positions Jack had established. Professionals then, not just hired muscle. "Charles Whitley was a murderer," Jack said flatly. "He killed Victor Hargrove, stole his identity, used his resources to bribe and intimidate innocent people. Whatever you lost, you never deserved to have in the first place." Silas's face contorted with rage. "You self-righteous bastard, playing the honorable rancher when you're nothing but a fool who let a woman lead him around by the nose." He spat on the ground. "Everyone in Pine Creek warned you about her, but you didn't listen. Now you'll both pay the price." "Last chance, Bowers," Jack warned. "Ride away. The federal marshal knows you're here. His deputy will arrive any day. I'll be long gone by then." Silas straightened in his saddle, his intent clear in every line of his body. "But first, I'm going to burn this ranch to the ground. And I'm going to make you watch as everything you love turns to ash." The threat hung in the air for one breathless moment. Then Silas's hand moved toward his holster, and the world erupted in gunfire. Eleanor fired first, her shot catching Silas's shoulder and spinning him in the saddle. The two gunmen split apart, seeking cover as bullets from the defenders rained around them. One made it to a water trough, returning fire with deadly accuracy that forced Michaels to duck back. From his window, the other gunman charged toward the barn, firing as he rode. From the loft, one of the ranch hands cried out and fell silent. Jack's rifle cracked beside Tommy's, their combined fire dropping the attacker from his horse. Silas had recovered his balance and was now firing methodically at the main house, forcing Jack and Tommy to take cover. Eleanor lined up another shot, but Silas saw the movement at the window and swung his gun toward her. She dropped to the floor as bullets splintered the window frame above her. The battle continued with brutal intensity. The remaining gunman was pinned down but dangerous, his shots keeping the defenders from advancing. Silas had dismounted and was working his way toward the house, using scattered equipment and fencing as cover. Eleanor reloaded her rifle, hands steady despite the chaos around her. Through the broken window, she could see Jack and Tommy exchanging fire with the gunman, but Silas had disappeared from her line of sight. A sudden intuition sent her hurrying toward the back stairs. If Silas knew the ranch layout, her instincts proved correct. As she reached the kitchen, the back door burst open, revealing Silas with a revolver in one hand and a kerosene lantern in the other. His face was streaked with blood from his shoulder wound, his eyes wild with hatred and pain. "Hello, Eleanor," he said with a terrible smile. "Charles always said you were cleverer than most. Pity it won't save you." Eleanor raised her rifle, but in the confined space of the kitchen, Silas was too close, too fast. He hurled the lantern against the wall, where it shattered in a spray of glass and flaming oil. Then he lunged for her, knocking the rifle aside as fire began to climb the wooden walls. They grappled in the smoky kitchen, Silas's superior strength nearly overwhelming her. He slammed her against the table, his hands going for her throat. "You should have stayed a good little accomplice," he snarled. "Charles would have made you rich beyond your dreams. He would have killed me once I stopped being useful." Eleanor gasped, clawing at his grip. Just like he killed Victor. Her hand found a cast-iron skillet on the table behind her. With all her remaining strength, she swung it against Silas's injured shoulder. He howled in pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to slip away. The fire was spreading rapidly, consuming the dry wood of the kitchen walls and ceiling. Smoke filled the room, making it hard to see, harder to breathe. Eleanor stumbled toward the doorway, leading to the main part of the house, but Silas recovered too quickly. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around to face him. "We'll burn together," he promised, raising his revolver. A deafening shot filled the kitchen. For an instant, Eleanor thought she was hit. Then she saw the look of surprise blooming on Silas's face, the dark stain spreading across his chest. He looked down, uncomprehending, then back at her before crumpling to the floor. Jack stood in the doorway, smoke swirling around him, his revolver still raised. "Eleanor!" he shouted, rushing forward to pull her away from Silas's body and the advancing flames. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, coughing in the thickening smoke. "The house is just a house," he finished firmly, pulling her toward the front door. "Everything that matters is right here." They burst out onto the porch into chaos. The main house was engulfed in flames, sparks carried by the wind threatening. The barn and bunkhouse. The remaining gunman lay dead in the yard, taken down by Michaels while Jack had gone in search of Eleanor. Ranch hands formed a bucket line from the well, futilely trying to contain the blaze. Tommy appeared through the smoke, his face blackened, but relief evident when he saw them. "Thank God," he breathed, "when we saw the kitchen go up." He trailed off, then gestured toward the burning house. "I'm sorry, Jack. Don't think we can save it." Jack nodded, his arms still around Eleanor. "Focus on keeping the fire from spreading to the other buildings. The house is lost." As they moved away from the intense heat of the burning structure, Eleanor looked back at what had been their home for the past years, the place where they had built their life together, where they had found peace after so much turmoil. Now reduced to flame and ash because of a grudge that had followed them from another life. "I'm sorry," she whispered, echoing Tommy's words. "This is my fault. If I hadn't brought this danger to your door." Jack turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Don't," he said firmly. "Don't ever apologize for coming into my life." He glanced at the burning house, then back to her face. "We built this once. We can build it again, better." The federal deputy arrived with Sheriff Hayes the following morning to find the main house of Silverwater Ranch a smoldering ruin, but its people undefeated. They catalogued the evidence, took statements, and removed the bodies of Silas Bowers and his hired guns. The official report would state that justice had been served, albeit at significant cost. The community of Pine Creek rallied around them in the aftermath. Neighboring ranchers offered temporary housing, supplies, and labor to help rebuild. Tommy and Martha insisted that Jack and Eleanor stay with them until new accommodations could be arranged at the ranch. "Besides," Martha said practically as she showed them to the spare room in their small house in town, "you've been talking about redesigning the main house for months. Now's your chance to build exactly what you want." She was right, Eleanor realized. Despite the trauma and loss, there was opportunity in this destruction. A chance to create something new, something that truly reflected who they had become together. The plans began to take shape within days. Jack sketched layouts, while Eleanor listed requirements: a larger kitchen with windows facing the sunrise, a proper office for the ranch's growing business affairs, more bedrooms for the future they both envisioned but had rarely discussed. "What do you think about adding a nursery?" Jack asked casually one evening as they reviewed the drawings. Eleanor looked up, a question in her eyes. "A nursery?" His smile was tentative, hopeful. "For when we need one, if you want." The thought caught her by surprise. Not the desire for children, which had been growing in her heart, but the realization that such a future was truly possible now. With Silas gone, the last shadow of her past with Victor Hargrove had been lifted. They were free to look forward, not back. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I think we should definitely include a nursery." Construction began as summer reached its peak. The new house rose rapidly, the community's support accelerating progress beyond their most optimistic estimates. By the time autumn's first chill touched the air, the framework was complete and the roof nearly finished. Eleanor stood on the porch of the half-built structure, watching as Jack directed the placement of new windows. The ranch continued to function around them, cattle grazing in the distance, hands going about their daily tasks, life moving forward despite the disruption. Sheriff Hayes rode up, dismounting with the stiffness of age that had prompted his retirement announcement. "Place is coming along nicely," he observed, joining Eleanor on the porch. "Better than we could have hoped," she agreed. "We're hoping to be in before the first snow." Hayes nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. "Got something for you," he said, reaching into his coat. "Federal Marshal sent it from Helena. Thought you might want to know." He handed her a folded newspaper clipping. Eleanor opened it to find an article from a Boston paper dated 2 weeks earlier. The headline read, "Hargrove Mining Company Restored to Prosperity Under New Leadership." The piece detailed how Elizabeth Hargrove had successfully rebuilt her family's business, implementing reforms that improved working conditions and eliminated the corrupt practices of the Whitley era. A small photograph showed Elizabeth outside, the company's Boston headquarters, looking confident and at peace. "Seems like good news travels slow out here," Hayes commented, "but I figured you'd want to see that things worked out back east too." Eleanor smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Sheriff. This means a lot." As Hayes departed, Eleanor tucked the clipping into her pocket, a tangible reminder that redemption was possible, that good could emerge from even the darkest circumstances. She thought of Elizabeth Hargrove, who had lost so much but found the strength to rebuild and reform her family's legacy. Perhaps they were not so different after all. Jack joined her, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Hayes bring news?" "Good news," she confirmed, showing him the clipping. "Elizabeth succeeded in Boston, just as we're rebuilding here." Jack read the article, his expression warming. "Looks like we all got our second chances. Third or fourth in my case," Eleanor said with a wry smile. "I've lost count." He laughed, pulling her close. "However many it takes," he promised. "That's how many you'll get." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the new foundation of their home, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from her desperate flight from Victor Hargrove to this moment of peace and purpose, a path marked by warnings unheeded, trust given against all advice, and love found in the most unexpected circumstances. "Everyone warned the cowboy about the bride," she murmured, the old phrase now a private joke between them. Jack finished it with a smile, and the cowboy never regretted ignoring them. Around them, Silverwater Ranch continued its rhythms, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the stable, the calls of workers finishing their day's labor. Their home was rising from ashes stronger than before. Their future stretched before them, no longer shadowed by the past. And if new challenges came, as they surely would in the harsh, beautiful land they had claimed as their own, they would face them together, the cowboy and his bride, who had defied warnings to find their truth. The winter that followed the fire was one of the harshest in Montana memory. Snow fell early and deep, blanketing Silverwater Ranch in pristine white that glittered like diamonds under the cold sun. The new house stood strong against the elements, its thick walls keeping the bitter cold at bay, its hearth burning bright through the long nights. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching as Jack made his way back from the barn, snow crunching beneath his boots. 5 months had passed since they had defeated Silas Bowers. 5 months of rebuilding, of looking forward instead of back. The new house was larger than the old one, designed with both practicality and comfort in mind. The promised nursery remained, empty for now, but Eleanor touched her abdomen gently, a secret smile playing at her lips. She hadn't told Jack yet. The signs had been there for weeks, morning sickness that she'd blamed on winter fatigue, a fullness to her figure that her husband had noticed but not questioned. Dr. Wilson from Pine Creek had confirmed her suspicions. 3 days ago, sworn to secrecy until Eleanor could find the right moment to share the news. Tonight, she decided. Christmas Eve seemed the perfect time to tell Jack he would be a father come summer. The front door opened, bringing a swirl of cold air and the stomping of snow-covered boots. Jack appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face reddened from the cold, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "Storm's getting worse," he announced, accepting the cup of coffee Eleanor offered. "Tommy and the boys have the herd in the sheltered pasture. Should be safe enough there." Eleanor nodded, leaning into his embrace as he pulled her close. "Sheriff, Hayes sent word that the Christmas gathering at the church is cancelled, too dangerous for folks to travel." Jack's disappointment was evident. The annual Pine Creek Christmas celebration was a tradition they had come to cherish, especially in the years since Eleanor had been accepted by the community. "Just us, then," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just us," she agreed, thinking of the gift she had yet to give him. "I think we can manage a proper Christmas all the same." That evening, they shared a simple but special meal at the table Jack had crafted himself from pine, salvaged after the fire. A remnant of their old life incorporated into the new. The house was decorated with evergreen boughs and red berries, gathered from the forest edge, candles glowing in every window. "I have something for you," Jack said as they lingered over dessert. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box carved with intricate designs. "Made it myself. Been working on it for weeks." Eleanor accepted the box, running her fingers over the detailed carvings, wildflowers and grass, reminiscent of the Montana prairie in summer. She opened it carefully to find a delicate silver locket nestled within. The piece was clearly antique, its surface etched with flowing patterns that caught the candlelight. "It was my mother's," Jack explained, as Eleanor lifted it reverently. "One of the few things I've kept all these years. Sarah never wore it, said it should wait for—" He hesitated. "For the next generation." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion as she opened the locket to find it empty, waiting. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jack took it from her, and moved behind her to fasten it around her neck. "There's something fitting about you wearing it now," he said, his voice low. "My past and my future together." The moment was perfect. Eleanor turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "I have something for you too," she said softly, "though I can't wrap it or put it in a box." Jack's brow furrowed in curious confusion. "What is it?" Eleanor guided his hand to her still, flat stomach, watching as understanding dawned in his eyes. "We'll need that nursery after all," she said, her voice catching, "by summer's end." For a moment, Jack simply stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to wonder. Then he pulled her into his arms, a sound escaping him that was half laugh, half sob. "A child," he breathed against her hair. "Our child." The joy that filled their home that night was warmer than any fire, brighter than any candle. As the storm raged outside, they planned and dreamed, imagining the future that had once seemed impossible during those dark days when they had first met. "Boy or girl doesn't matter," Jack said as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over Eleanor's stomach. "Just healthy and strong like their mother." "And kind and steady like their father," Eleanor added, watching the snowflakes swirl past their window, illuminated by moonlight breaking through the clouds. Spring arrived gradually, the snow retreating to reveal the fresh green of new grass. Eleanor's body changed with the season, her pregnancy now visible to all, celebrated by the community that had once regarded her with suspicion. "Never thought I'd see the day," Martha Cooper remarked as she helped Eleanor sort through a trunk of baby clothes donated by various Pine Creek families. Jack Miller, the man who swore he'd never love again after Sarah died, now grinning like a fool every time someone mentions the baby. Eleanor smiled, folding a tiny nightgown with careful hands. "Life has a way of surprising us." "That it does," Martha agreed. "Just like no one expected you to become the most respected woman in Pine Creek, not after the way you arrived." She patted Eleanor's hand. "Goes to show you can't always trust first impressions or town gossip." The wisdom of Martha's words was reinforced a week later when a letter arrived from Boston. Elizabeth Hargrove wrote with news of her continued success, rebuilding her family's legacy, and an unexpected revelation. She was engaged to be married to a professor of geology from Harvard University, a man who had been consulting on improvements to the Hargrove mining operations. "She found her second chance too," Eleanor told Jack as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold. "Despite everything her family endured," Jack nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "Seems to be going around." As summer bloomed across the Montana landscape, Silverwater Ranch flourished. The cattle herd expanded, the crops flourished in. The fields and the new orchards Jack had planted in the fall showed promise. Life was unfolding with a richness that neither Jack nor Eleanor had dared to imagine when they first met. The baby arrived on a clear August morning, as the first hint of autumn touched the distant mountains. A healthy girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, her cries strong and indignant as Dr. Wilson placed her in Eleanor's arms. "She's perfect," Jack whispered, perched on the edge of the bed, his finger caught in his daughter's surprisingly strong grip. "What shall we call her?" Eleanor studied the tiny face, already showing signs of the determined spirit she would surely need as a rancher's daughter in this untamed land. "Hope," she decided, "because that's what she represents, for both of us." Jack's eyes glistened as he nodded. "Hope Miller. It suits her." News of Hope's birth spread quickly through Pine Creek. Visitors arrived daily, bearing gifts and well wishes, the same people who had once warned Jack away from the mysterious Eleanor Blackwood, now cooing over their child, declaring she had her mother's beauty and her father's steady gaze. Sheriff Hayes, recently retired but still a respected figure in the community, arrived with a small silver rattle. "Been saving this," he admitted gruffly as he presented it to Eleanor. "My wife and I never had children of our own. Seems right it should go to someone who'll use it." As he held Hope carefully, the former lawman's weathered face softened. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when you first came to Pine Creek, I was among those who told Jack to be careful. Thought you might bring trouble." He shook his head with a rueful smile. "Guess I was right about that part." Eleanor laughed, exchanging a glance with Jack. "You weren't entirely wrong." "No," Hayes agreed, "but I was wrong about what that trouble would lead to." He looked around the warm kitchen of the home they had rebuilt, at the family they had created. Sometimes, the best things in life come from taking risks others warn you against. As autumn painted the landscape in rich golds and deep reds, Eleanor often sat on the porch with Hope in her arms, watching Jack work with the horses in the corral or inspect the cattle in the nearby pasture. The ranch had healed from the fire, emerging stronger and more prosperous than before. One cool afternoon, as Hope slept peacefully against her chest, Eleanor noticed a rider approaching from the direction of Pine Creek. She recognized Tommy's distinctive posture long before she could make out his features. "Jack!" she called, alerting her husband to the visitor. Tommy dismounted with his usual easy grace, his expression unreadable as he approached the porch. "Afternoon, Eleanor," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Little one's sleeping, I see." "Just went down," Eleanor confirmed. "What brings you out this way? Everything all right in town?" "More than all right," Tommy replied as Jack joined them, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Got news you'll want to hear. Stage brought the mail today, including this." He pulled an official-looking envelope from his jacket. "From the Territorial Governor's office." Jack accepted the envelope with a puzzled frown. "What would the governor want with us?" "Open it and see," Tommy suggested, a hint of a smile finally breaking through his serious demeanor. Jack broke the seal and unfolded the letter within, reading aloud for Eleanor's benefit. His voice faltered as he reached the key passage. "In recognition of your service to justice and the good of the Montana Territory, I am pleased to inform you that the land grant you requested has been approved. The 500 acres adjoining your current property are hereby transferred to your ownership, effective immediately." He looked up, stunned. "Land grant? I never requested—" "No, but I did," Tommy interrupted, his smile widening. "Well, not just me. Half the town signed the petition after what you both did, exposing Victor Hargrove's scheme. Bringing down Silas Bowers seemed only right. You should be rewarded." Eleanor's free arm tightened around Hope as the implications sank in. The adjoining land had been in dispute for years, claimed by an eastern speculator who had never set foot in Montana. With this grant, Silverwater Ranch would nearly double in size, securing their future and Hope's inheritance. "Tommy, I don't know what to say," Jack began, emotion thickening his voice. Tommy waved off his thanks. "Just doing right by good people. Besides, Martha would never let me hear the end of it if I hadn't followed through." His expression turned serious. "Everyone in Pine Creek knows the truth now about how wrong we were to judge Eleanor when she first arrived. This is the town's way of making amends." Later, after Tommy had departed and Hope had been settled in her cradle, Jack and Eleanor stood at the edge of their property, looking out over the land that was now theirs. The setting sun bathed the rolling prairie in golden light, turning the distant mountains to purple shadows against the sky. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said softly, leaning into Jack's embrace. "It is," he agreed. "Hard to believe how much has changed since that stormy night when you first arrived." Eleanor smiled at the memory. "Who would have thought that the woman everyone warned you about would end up bringing you all this?" Jack turned her to face him, his eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "I knew," he said simply. "Not right away, perhaps. But I knew there was more to your story than the warnings." In the house behind them, Hope began to cry, her tiny voice carrying on the evening breeze. Eleanor started to turn, but Jack caught her hand. "You were worth every warning," he said, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Every risk, every fight." Eleanor's heart swelled with a happiness that still sometimes felt undeserved, yet was undeniably real. "So were you," she answered. "My stubborn cowboy who wouldn't listen to reason." Together they walked back toward the house, toward their daughter's cries, toward the future they had fought so hard to secure. Behind them, the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of promise. In the years that followed, the story would be told and retold throughout Pine Creek and beyond. How a desperate woman running from her past found sanctuary with a grieving rancher, how a town's warnings went unheeded, and how that defiance led not to disaster, but to one of the greatest love stories the Montana Territory had ever known. And if travelers passing through ever asked about the prosperous ranch with the fine house and thriving orchards, they would hear the tale of Jack and Eleanor Miller, proof that sometimes the most important warnings are the ones your heart tells you to ignore. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.